people around her to give me some words to describe her. They said things like passionate. I don't think the one guy meant bossy, but he kind of said sort of bossy, but he said that in a nice way. Passionate, a professional, and a first among many. So I would like you to join me in welcoming our very special guest for this afternoon, our living legend, Miss Gloria Austin. All right, so we are here today. For the next 4 hours, we're going to... How long did we say no?
I can't remember all of these questions for 4 hours.
I have notes, so I'll be able to help.
Oh, good. I don't.
Well,
I have to remember my life? Is that what you're telling me?
You live this. If you don't remember it, it's
right.
good. Just make it up. It's okay.
Make
That's what
it
they do. Okay, we'll start with the easy questions. When were you born? You can't be here unless you're willing to answer that question.
Do I have to tell you? April 7th, 1942. I hope a lot of you were born that year.
The rest of you can do your own math. Okay. Where were you born?
I was born in a hospital in Hornell, New York, and I would think I was the first in my family to be born in a hospital, although my younger brother is here, and I know he was born in a hospital because he came along 18 months after I did. And I had to contend with him 13 months. That's the sister-in-law speaking. But I had to contend with him my entire life. So
tell me, Hornell, New York, where in relation to a bigger city is that?
It's south of Rochester, New York. If you know, that's on Lake Ontario. It's 85 miles south of Rochester, New York, and it's right on the Pennsylvania state line. So the next town was Pennsylvania.
And what was your father's name?
Myron Hamlin Austin.
Do you know
Did I get that right, Niall?
That's why it's not working. I have it on.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's on now. I'm turning it off. After you turn it down, I'll turn it back on.
Sound system.
Okay, fine. I can edit all these videos. Okay, it gets better. Oh my goodness, it's going to be lovely. Better.
Can you still hear me? You can still hear me, I think.
Turn you off.
No, you can't hear me now. We should have done we should have done what Madonna did. She probably tested that all out.
All right, so, and your mother's name?
Velma Esther Preston, and then her married name was Austin.
Our mothers are often our very first teachers. So did your mother teach you any important lessons that you take with you?
Yes. I think the saying I heard most around my house was, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And maybe many of you were raised that way as well. And I've tried to do that most of my life. The second expression I remember hearing her say is, your education is the only thing they can't take away from you. And she graduated only from 8th grade, and so did my father graduate only from 8th grade. So she was very determined that her children go on to college. And my brother's an engineer, and I have a master's degree in public administration.
You're jumping ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I'm fired.
What did your father do for a living?
My father was principally a cattle dealer. We were raised on a dairy farm because he bought and sold dairy cattle principally, and so that's what I did. I'm not going to get ahead then. I'm not going to talk.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Oh, I'm okay.
when we talked before, you said there was some intrigue about how your father bought and sold cattle. Tell me a little bit what that was like to see him do those things.
Well, I can remember peering out the window and seeing him stand around with these men, and they were all talking back and forth, and it was always kind of a secret thing because they kind of kept the children away from any visiting people that were there to buy cattle or to negotiate a deal. But I used to be able to keep track of the days of the week based on where my father was at a cattle auction. So if it was Tuesday, he was in, now don't correct me on the day of the week, please. If it was Tuesday, it was Elkland. If it was Wednesday, he was in Bath. If it was Thursday, he was in Pavilion. So I knew the day of the week based on where he was. So we always kept track of things that way, I guess, because he was gone a good share of the time. So at least during the days. But he was always there at night. And I can remember as a child sitting on the arm of his chair. He always had a nice easy chair, and he always read the newspaper in the evening. So I can remember sitting on, I think you were on one arm, Niall, and I was on the other arm of the chair, and he was reading the newspaper and trying to relate to his children. So we had excellent parents when I was young. My mother was very loving, and so was my father. He was very protective of us when we were out on the farm, though. He wanted to make sure we weren't injured, so we had very specific rules that we had to follow when we were out on the farm, so we didn't get caught in a piece of in a baler or some of the equipment that was on the farm.
So can I ask you a question? Do you have a cell phone in your pocket?
Yes, I do.
Does anybody else have a cell phone in their pocket?
I thought I silenced it.
Yeah, so neither one of us turned our phones off before we started this.
If I stand up, and particularly this past weekend when I was around, I wear these loose smocky things not only to disguise my little bit aging physique, but also to disguise all the electronic equipment I carry on. But I got to keep that covered up. And well, I thought I had turned it off. Well, I'll be darned.
Well, we're still in the 40s in our conversation, so I don't want to cell phone before that.
Yeah, better.
Okay.
We'll let that go.
1942. That means you were born in wartime. Were there some differences to the way we live today about dealing with wartime rationing and that sort of thing?
Well, yeah, I can remember my father and mother had a closet, and we used to always like to play in the big closets, because you could walk underneath the clothes and that sort of thing. And that was a time when they rotated summer and winter clothing. I think we Floridians just wear summer clothing all the while, don't we? But anyway, so I can remember playing back in that closet, and we'd find a bag of sugar, or a bag of flour, or a bag of something in the bottom of the thing, because my father had been out at a cattle auction and he'd picked up some extra sugar or some extra flour, and it might have been black market. I have no idea what it was, but it was in the base of our closet, these great big, or their closet, I can remember in particular, because their closet was downstairs and our bedrooms were all upstairs, and in the cold, we didn't have second floor heating. We heated our house, our bedrooms at night were heated by the fact we opened the upstairs door so the downstairs heat could go to the upstairs rooms. And maybe most of you, many of you are probably raised in households like that where centralized heating had just come in. My grandfather, by the way, made his money through selling ductwork at a hardware store for centralized heating because he owned a hardware store.
If I have it correct, your mother was a housewife.
Yeah.
But being a housewife on a farm is a little different than being a housewife in the city or the suburbs. So
yes.
Tell me, what does that mean for her?
That means she worked from morning till dusk, and she not only performed her household chores, which were washing and cooking and cleaning and mopping the kitchen floor every morning of the week, or all week long. Because of the farm traffic going in and out of the kitchen, when you'd sit down and eat, you'd track in something and that sort of thing. But she also, when she got through with her morning chores, she would go down to the barn, and because we had the old-fashioned milking machines, and my father kept a dairy, sometimes a cow would only be there for a few days because it would be sold, but then there were our favorite cows that were there. But she used to wash the milk dishes, we used to call it, which were all the milking apparatus to make sure that they were clean and sanitized.
So tell me, who are Vernon and Joyce?
Vernon and Joyce are my deceased older brother and my living older sister. And my eldest brother was 13 years older than I, and I think that the sister is 9.5 years older than I am. And then I came along, so my playmate was actually my youngest brother, and I learned a lot from him.
We're going to get into that, I think.
Oh, okay.
If that's okay, Niall. Yeah. My next question is, you could prove this later if you want to read it off my card.
Okay.
Niall came after you. Did you have a close bond?
Well, I'm not sure. I liked him a lot because he was my playmate, and I can remember going into his bedroom and shaking him and saying, "Niall, it's time to play, it's time to play." Because my eldest sister said after I was born, I hit the ground running, and I didn't stop since then. So my younger brother is an engineer, so you know what you have to do to be an engineer, don't you? You have to sit still and do calculations and do all of that. So I had to get him up and going in the morning to go play whatever we were going to play that day, Cowboys and Indians or whatever we played. But he taught me a lot because I knew how to get people out of bed in the morning, just to shake them, and then to interest them in the day's activities. So I had to organize something for the day for us to do. And so he offered me a lot of skills, leadership skills, because I had to say, come on, Niall, do this, do that, do what. Maybe, I don't know.
I just want you to know how fabulous you're doing, because my next question is...
Oh, I'm ahead of you.
No, you're fantastic. A lot of us know who Gloria Austin is today, but what kind of a kid were you? So you're telling us already. I'm not allowed to take questions from the audience, Sarah. I'm sorry.
That's right. No, I trust I was very active. I can remember being very active and always wanting to go places. I wanted to be outside, and Niall wanted to bake brownies with my mom. Now, he married a home economics teacher, so he's still learning how to bake brownies. But anyway, so I was very active, and I always wanted a horse when I was a child, too, so yeah.
Yeah, we know
that leads you into the next
no,
question.
we'll get to that. Okay. I think we might get to horses today. We might decide to talk about horses.
Yeah, that's right.
Your mother obviously was education was very important to her, so tell us, what kind of a student were you?
Well, I tried to be an A student. And also I tried to please my mother because my mother was not well when I was born. I was born late in her life, and she died when she was 59. So when I was a teenager, I always felt I had to entertain her and bring home the best grades and the best report card, and to keep my mother interested in my cheerleading activities and my school activities and things like that. So even when I went away to college, I always came back for the weekends to make sure my mother was okay, because she had diabetes and all the complications of diabetes, if some of you know that or have that condition. So I tried to stay active, and I generally, do you want me to talk about leadership roles, or you got another question there?
She said she doesn't remember the questions, but you're like doing so well. Yeah, my question, we know you led Niall because, he kind of was a captain. But
yeah, he was a captain. Yeah.
Students in school, that sort of thing. Were you a leader in school?
Well, yes, but merely because I chose the right people to lead my campaign for student council president. I chose, as you know from this weekend, if any of you were there, I chose the most popular boy in our class to be my campaign chairman for student council. So I was got to the position of being elected president of the student council.
Wait a second. What grade was that in?
I don't know. No, you didn't ask me.
You told me it was 9th grade. It was very early.
Oh,
was it
no,
not?
that was cheerleading.
Cheerleading. I'm sorry. I'm getting it now. I'm getting ahead.
He's getting mixed up. I need to ask him the questions. What happened in cheerleading, I was a cheerleader in the JV squad, because women weren't supposed to be basketball players. We were the cheerleaders. Yay, do this, do that, and we cheer you on. So I was in the junior varsity squad when I was in 8th grade, or 7th and 8th grade, as I recall. But very early on, like in 9th grade, I became the captain I got on the varsity team of the cheerleading squad, and then became captain of the varsity team fairly early on, because usually you had to be a senior to do that, and I was an underclassman when I was captain of the cheerleading team. So, yes, yes.
I was wondering what took you so long.
That's right.
I think we've already started on this. Your mother was a big proponent of college education.
Yes.
Did she influence where you chose to attend?
Well, indirectly she did, because I was very worried about her health, and I wanted to stay as close to home as possible, not only to check in on my mother because she was not in good health, but also I'd be close to my horse. And I could come home on weekends and ride the horse. So that's why I chose Alfred University. And because I was very good in math and science, just like my brother is, But I don't have the personality for math and science. Did you guess that? I can't sit still long enough to do a calculation. And we did calculations with slide rules then. So that was, and then my brother came along 2 years later, and guess what? He had a Texas Instrument calculator. I would have died for that in my math and science classes. So I started out in math and science because the Sputnik had gone off. Do you remember Russia fired off, and there was the race to be and everybody was pushed into math and science, whether you had the personality for it or not. So I was to be a math and science school teacher. Can I talk about that a little bit?
I think you should. It's next on the list. Yeah, go for it.
At the time I went to school, women could be a teacher, a secretary, or a nurse. Okay, that was the only choices we had. So if you were gifted in math and science, nobody told me I could be an engineer like my brother. In fact, I sat in mathematics classes with ceramic engineers at Alfred University. If you know anything about Alfred, it's very noted for its ceramics engineering and ceramics design school. Well, I sat in class with these ceramics engineers. It never crossed my mind to be an engineer. And I think that would have been more interesting than teaching school, but I've ended up kind of being a teacher anyway, so there you go. So.
I'm sure that you were very determined, powered right through school, got a master's degree, nothing got in the way?
Oh no, marriage and children got in the way. So I got married and started having children and finished my degree program in Rochester, New York, with a very liberal college called Empire State College. I don't know whether any of you are from New York. It's part of the state university system, and affording to go to college was a serious consideration, as it is even today. But the state colleges were decidedly lower in tuition, so I went to Empire State College, and it was where you could design your own curriculum. Ooh, that's fun, isn't it? And I could take my credits that I'd accumulated at Alfred University, and they accepted all of them because my grades were fairly good. So I got my undergraduate degree from Empire State College and then went on to Brockport to get my graduate degree. I really wanted to go to Wharton School. Do you know the Wharton School? Oh, wow. Or the University of Chicago. I dream about those places. But when all you can afford is the state college, and it's not that you didn't get a good education there, because you did, because the New York State system is really outstanding. That's what happened. I just interrupted it with children and a little...
Well, before we get to your children, you talked earlier about having a horse.
Yes, I had a horse. Well, guess what? Television came on the scene. And do you remember Saturday morning television? Yeah. Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, Cisco's Kid, Sky King, Dale Evans rode off on buttermilk into the sunset and all that sort of thing. So I got this silly idea that maybe, I'd like to ride off into the sunset on a horse like Buttermilk, or a Palomino like Roy Rogers or whatever. So I turned to my father, because obviously I'm this high, and say, Dees, can I have a horse? Can I have a horse? Well, his first job from graduating from 8th grade was to drive a pair of draft horses on road construction. Why? Because he was too small to do manual labor. Our father was fairly small in size, okay? So that's how we started. So when I begged for a horse on the farm again, because in 1942, when I was born, and definitely in the late 40s, the tractor was well seated in our culture. And so he had tractors and trucks and all of that stuff. And he really loved horses. So it was not difficult to convince him that I needed a saddle horse. But it was difficult because you had to, when you lived on a farm, the animals had to produce. They had to do something, or else they were slaughtered. They were not on, or they were on your dining room table. So we were very utilitarian in those days. You couldn't afford a pet. If you had a dog, it was a working dog. If you had a cat, it was catching mice in the grain room. And if you had a horse, it was herding cattle. And I promised faithfully to go out and bring the milk cows into the barn without chasing them around or anything else. So that was my early horse experience. But can I go on about...
You're doing okay.
Well, here's thing. After a while, the reality sets in that if you're in college and you're only home on weekends, and it's very few weekends, you can't keep supporting a horse, or your father can't keep supporting a horse for you to go home just on the weekend to ride. So I reluctantly agreed to sell my horse, and it paid for 2 semesters of books for college. So I can remember that distinctly. Thank God my father was paying my tuition for college. So it paid for 2 semesters of books. And I went 20 years without a horse, and then at age 40 bought a horse again. But maybe I'm getting ahead.
You're getting ahead,
I'm
but
getting ahead.
you talked about interrupting college with marriage.
Yes.
Everyone has different experiences with marriage, so let's go on to your kids.
Yes.
Did I do that right?
You did
we do that right?
after marriage,
Yeah.
the kids came.
That's right. You had 2 children.
I had 2 children.
So tell me about your children.
I have a daughter, Cynthia, who's produced 6 fantastic grandchildren that all have their problems and everything else, but they're all up and healthy and going, and still my, let's see, second granddaughter has just entered college, which thank God for that. My daughter had, and then I had a handicapped son born to me, and that was Stephen. And that really changed my life. And I think if any of you have any experience with handicapped children, he's developmentally disabled, and he's got an IQ about 48, 49. He can dress himself, he can feed himself, but he needs kind of constant supervision and care to get places and that sort of thing.
So how did his life and you living and mothering a child with what's the right word?
Kind of disability?
The disability, absolutely.
Yeah.
My brain stopped for
Yeah,
half a
no,
moment there.
that's okay.
With that type of disability, how did that change your life? Where did that put you on?
I switched from mathematics to community psychology, and I got a master's in public administration because I was already volunteering in the field, because the minute you have a child that's disabled, you become involved in all of the local organizations, the Association for Retarded Citizens, the Mary Carriola Center, which was for very young children. And so I switched my major, and I actually got a job. I volunteered in an area where it was called the Monroe County Coordinating Group for Mental Retardation. That was the name of it at the time. What that organization did is to coordinate the state, federal, and local government planning. And they actually employed me in that area. And they employed me at a critical time when my first ex-husband, and I was employed at a critical time when we were starting a company called Paychecks. So my income actually supported the household for a good couple of years, while this fledgling company was making very little money. And so I was influenced to go into human services and this coordination of federal, state. And it was at a unique time when they were repatriating handicapped individuals from these hardcore institutions like Willowbrook and down in Long Island. And they were repatriating them back to the local community, because there was a philosophy that said at the time, these young people or older people were better served in the local communities and group homes and close to their parents, where their parents could advocate for them. So I was instrumental in developed the comprehensive community plan for the repatriation of clients from Willowbrook, Newark, back to Monroe County, which Monroe County was about 1.2 million people, maybe at the time, I'm not sure.
So we're talking about at a time when, for a long time, the idea if you had someone with a developmental disability, they should be shipped off to an institution.
Yes.
So that you don't have emotional connection to them.
That was commonplace in the early days, is to get your child, your son or your daughter, as far away from you as possible, so you would sever the emotional bonds with the person. So if you were in upstate New York, your child went to Willowbrook, but if you lived in New York City, your child went to upstate New York. I mean, go figure that one out. But there's a guy from Bentneria from Sweden who said there's a different way of doing things. And you know, Sweden is quite progressive with its human services. Even today it is with the elderly with dementia. But at the time, they felt that people with handicapping conditions should be as close to their families as possible to maintain the bonds, because the families, the mothers and the fathers and the sisters and the brothers are the greatest advocates for those handicapped people. So that whole system of care was switched to community-based services. So I wrote the plan for Monroe County for that.
You've already mentioned paychecks and your
Yes.
involvement, because your then husband was pushing that fledgling company.
Can I say something about
can-
my relationships?
You can say whatever you want. I'm not gonna push you.
Well,
My mother has a couple of ex-husbands, so I know
Oh,
those are
Save.
treacherous areas. Go
Save.
ahead.
My first ex-husband was Italian, so I've covered pasta. My second ex-husband was Welsh, so I've covered the potato. And the man I adore is sitting in the room with me now. And Gene, if you haven't figured out, he's probably the only Asian in the room, but he's been here so long in America, he thinks he's a white guy. But anyway, now I'm eating rice. So I've covered pasta, potatoes, and rice. I hope you appreciate that. Now I'm trying to get off all carbs altogether. I don't know what's going to happen to my relationships. But anyway.
So, will you describe for just a moment? Don't take too long, but give us just a moment what Paychecks is, and then tell us how what opportunity came up for you in that organization.
Well, my first ex-husband, you know, we have to deal with these things, I guess, anyway. He walked in the room and said, "I don't want to be married." I said, "What, you don't want to be married?" I said, "Okay, now what are we going to do now?" And so I had been with the company since its inception, been part of its naming process. Anytime any employee was out, guess who did all the work? Guess who did all the advising and all of this other sort of thing? Because that's the way I'd been raised. My mother on the farm was just a total support to my father. Anything that needed to be done was done. She took care of the household. She took care of the farm when he was traveling, or the employees came in to eat or whatever. So I knew the company forward and backwards. So I said, okay. The company had been franchised. There were various franchises around the United States. There were actually 18 key people who took franchises around the United States. I was the only woman. And at the time of our divorce, there were two areas in the country open: New York City and New Orleans, Louisiana. Well, now this is back in the 70s, in the mid-70s, and the South was still not receptive to women. And maybe still not, I don't know. At least Florida is, isn't it? I think we feel pretty well recognized here. We can own property married women can own property since 1882, I guess it was. Is that right, this weekend? But anyway, so I picked New York. And if you go to the public library, and this was not where you got information over the internet. I mean, now I can find out the population of New York and anything I want to. I just Google it. Well, then you had to go to a public library. Librarians, you have some value still. So I had to go to the public library, and I looked up the statistics on small businesses, because Paychecks does payroll and human services for small businesses, okay, or relatively small businesses. So I looked up the numbers between between one employee and now, forgive me, I don't remember the numbers exactly. Let's say 1 to 15 employees, because that was the size company we were servicing at the time. We made it easy for them to do payroll. All they had to do was call up on the phone. 250,000 businesses in the New York metropolitan area. 250,000 with between 1 and 15 employees. Well, you can't miss. You're going to trip over them if you go down the streets of Manhattan. You're going to trip over them in New Jersey. 7.5 million people in northern New Jersey, 8 million people in New York City, and I don't know how many on Long Island and Westchester County, and then you go on and on. So this was a no-brainer. You take the New York City franchise.
Now, why was that franchise even available?
Oh, my feeling is that the boys were afraid of it. It was too big, and it was in the largest payroll processor, I think, still today, outside of individual companies doing their own payroll, is still automatic data processing. And they were in New Jersey and New York City, all over. And they were afraid to go into the competitor's territory, okay? So, and many of them were unfamiliar with New York. I had college roommates from New York. I'd been to New York I don't know how many times, just visiting college roommate. So it didn't frighten me because I can get from here to China with no trouble. Gene can't, but I can. So he's been traveling with me around the world. So, but anyway, so that's why the area was so attractive, and we were very successful there.
Oh wait, you're getting too far ahead.
Oh, yeah, wait. Okay, all right, okay, go ahead.
I spent like 10 minutes on this next question, so
Oh,
I want to make sure. One of the recurring themes of your life is a woman taking on a man's world. So,
yes.
I mean, I think I'm not writing your life story
No,
exactly.
that's
but
right. No, that's right.
Did being a woman help you or hinder you in New York City when you were out there selling paychecks at the beginning?
I think it helped me. I hate to say that, because there were so few other women at the time doing what I was doing. And if you could waltz in as a woman and impress some man behind the desk of sitting there being, and they were great business owners. I don't mean to belittle them at all, but they were the king of their fiefdom. And if you could walk in and be attractive and know what you were talking about and save them money and lead them to greater confidentiality. The reason they use paychecks, by the way, is because of confidentiality. Because in small companies, everybody knows everything. I hate to tell you that, but they do. They even know when the other guy got a raise, okay? Big companies, you can kind of disguise that, and there's too many people to keep track of. But the big reason for using an outside data processing service was confidentiality. So we could say, Mr. Owner of this small business, you got 5 people here, you got 10. You can call us up on Monday morning and give us the hours and any special pay or any special needs you have. And on Tuesday, it'll all be delivered back to you. Oh, wasn't that great? So
Now,
it was a phone-in service, yeah.
I know you
At the time.
You told me you opened the doors for business January 1, but you had started selling beforehand. So when did you start selling, and where were you January 1 in terms of business?
I was I had more clients January 1 than any of the other, before I even started processing a payroll. I didn't even do a payroll yet, because I started selling in October. I sold, I think, 3.7 payrolls a day, every working day, from October through January 1st. We had more clients January 1st than any other office in the United States had after 1 full year of operation. Now, I'd like to think it was all me. I'd like to tell you it was all me. But you remember that 250,000 businesses? They were around every corner. And if you sell in Manhattan, you can spend 1 whole day in a high-rise in Manhattan cold calling, and you can hit 100 businesses. It's amazing. So I'd like to think it was me, but and it probably was, because I razzle-dazzled them when I went in. If a guy had a golf ball on his desk, we talked about golf. And if he had something else on his desk, if it was a horse, we really got in the swing of things. But whatever cues you can get is what you talk about, because you have to know the passion of the people that you're with. So
we're talking about the 1970s, and you're talking about a business that's very computer heavy. To process all that, you need computerization. A little expensive though. So
yes.
did you buy a computer to start out?
No. I rented a time on an IBM. Now let's see if I can get the model number right. 16 or something. You guys probably keep track of all the old computers, don't you? But they took up a whole room, and it had to be centrally located with air conditioning and all of that. So I rented time, and it was a company that ground and packaged coffee. So when you went there, and so I worked all day long selling payrolls, And then at 5 o'clock at night, I took all of the key punch cards. Do you remember the data entry cards? Key punch. See, I love this audience.
Isn't it great?
Key punch cards. That's right. So I took this stack of cards with the program instructions, over to the coffee house. Now I've got to smell coffee for about 2.5 hours, wafting through this factory where they ground it all day long and packaged it in cans. And had a wonderful, though, computer operator that was so nice. He stayed after hours and earned extra money by processing our payrolls. And we only, I think, once dropped all the cards on the floor, so they had to be recorded.
So you started out pretty successful. How successful did that get in New York City? Tell us about your timeline there.
Well, I actually opened operations centers in Mountainside, New Jersey, if you know where that is. And then we opened in a sales center in Manhattan, another operations center in Passaic, New Jersey, another operations center in Jericho, Long Island, which had both sales and operations in it. When I say operations center, there were computers there, and three sites and 5 sales sites, and one was in Westchester County, and another one in Darien, Connecticut. But you know, when you're a young company and starting out, the office was the porch of one salesperson I had there. So when I go to visit her about every 2 weeks, we sat on her front porch where she had her information and her little sales kit and everything else. So, you know, but what I loved is designing workflow, and that's what I love this facility, because I've tried to design it so that there's areas where things get done. Does that make sense? And so I love setting up offices because I knew the computer had to be centrally located with no windows and had to be air conditioned, and you know, and then all the workflow that went out around it. So.
How successful did the company become? And at some point it changed, right?
Yeah. Well, we jumped up the ladder. We were last, and then we moved up the ladder, and it ended up that, I mean, it was looking like we might take over the universe because there were so many people there. But and then we had wanted to buy our own equipment, because leasing equipment can get expensive. And so we had a stock-for-stock transfer, so I exchanged my stock for my company that I had, and so did all of the other franchisees, exchanged stock for stock in one major company, so we all merged together into one corporation.
Well, so what I'm going to do is, because we've done a great job so far, but you know, getting it all in,
right.
I will just kind of zoom a little for you.
Okay.
I'll edit for you.
Okay,
so
good.
We know that after that point you transitioned into a position with the company, but eventually that you decided to take a different path. I think this sort of takes us to ex-husband number 2, right? So we get to that in that point.
We wanted to go back to nature, and we set up a farm where we raised our own eggs, and we discovered we were producing them for $2.50 when you can buy them for 69 cents a pound.
So back to nature in New York State, and then you had a connection to Florida.
Yes.
Wait, how are we going to handle the second ex-husband? I was going to say, you
well,
probably don't want to talk now.
We don't need to
We're
talk
done.
about
We're done.
all
No, we handled it. That's it with the second ex-husband.
Yeah.
All right.
He was a back-to-nature type guy. He wanted to live in the country, and so we went back to our hometown and lived there for a while and discovered that didn't work. You can never go home, by the way. Do you know that? You can never go home.
So instead you came to Florida.
Came to Florida,
So
yeah.
tell us about that experience.
Well,
what brought you here?
My grandfather had asthma, and at the time, and I think it's still true because I talked to an allergist the other day, and she said it was felt that his health was better in a warm climate. So my grandfather had always come to Florida. Niall and I had come down a few times to Florida to visit my grandfather, and then my father had a place in Florida as well when they got retired. So it was always my dream to come to Central Florida. So that's why I'm here, because of my father and my grandfather.
Now, this gave you a chance to get back to horses.
Yes, I started a stable in upstate New York and a breeding farm up there because I wanted to get back to the horse thing, and that happened, and I started driving, collecting carriages.
But wait a second. So
coming to Florida.
You got to Florida. You told me something about being 40 and trying to get on a horse. What was that
Oh,
about?
yeah. By the way, if you're age 20 and you sell your horse and you start riding again at 40, it doesn't work very well. The body doesn't work very well. So my knees hurt me. I had ace bandages on my knees and my ankles, and my spine was hurting me, and I got thrown from one horse onto the ground. I mean, he was a wonderful animal, but he just got frightened, and it just happened. I came off, and so I injured my spine, and I said, there must be a better way than riding on their back. So that's when I tell everybody age got me into driving, because you can just sit there and manipulate the reins, and not that you don't use your muscles in your body, because you do, but it certainly looks a lot more comfortable than a strider horse. So.
At the time, though, again, we're going to talk about that idea of being a woman in a man's world specifically. Carriages are traditionally, carriage driving specifically, is traditionally male. The first people you saw doing it were older men,
yes.
Obviously. So,
and particularly when you drive these large vehicles to 4 horses, that's very dominated around the world by men. What the opportunity it gave me is to participate in your men's world. Remember that? This seems to be a theme that's running throughout. Is you guys look to me like you're having more fun than I had in the kitchen. So, right. So, and interestingly, driving a horse here, driving a horse in Europe, driving in Australia, driving a horse anywhere, it's the same the world around. In fact, I rode a water buffalo in Jean's country in the Philippines, and I managed perfectly well on a water buffalo, didn't I?
I could teach you.
Oh, he had to teach me, because it's a jerk line. It's a different system of signaling the animal. But anyway, so it's the horses and the carriages have given me an opportunity to go around the world and to be accepted in circles that people would have never accepted me. The aristocrats of Europe, many of them know me because I'm a carriage driver, and I could drive 4 horses to a big heavy coach.
So I think a lot of people walking through this place would ask the question, how does a person get to collect over 160 carriages? How do you start?
You start with 1 horse and age, and you meld the two, and it means a carriage. And so I started with 1 carriage, and I was up in New York State near Walnut Hill in Pittsburgh, New York, and their driving show was a traditional driving show where you recreated driving the way it was years ago. So I bought an antique carriage and had it refurbished and drove it at this competition. So it just went from there to pairs, and then I won championships with pairs 2 years in a row, and I said, what am I going to do now? I guess I'm going to have to go on to the 4. I saw these men that were elderly driving 4 horses, and it looked like they were so weak you could blow them off the top of the carriage. And I said, I think as a woman, maybe I'm strong enough to do that. So did that answer the question?
Absolutely.
Well, it gave me a chance to hang out with the boys. And I love hanging out with my brother. And, well, not that I don't, my sister-in-law and other people, other women, but I like hanging out with the boys, too.
Along the way, you built yourself a name in national, international circles. At the same time, your collection was growing and you needed a little more space. We won't tell everybody where you live, but it's not that far from
It's
here.
not far
It's a small area. It's a decent-sized piece of land, but you're going to drive 4 horses around it. So what made you choose the land where we are now?
Well, and in fact, I just met the realtor's wife here. Where is she? Just raise your hand. The realtor. Nikki. Raise your hand. Her husband, I was in Central Florida staying in a Popka, boarding a horse at Rocking Horse Ranch in Altoona. Her husband was a realtor in Eustis, Florida. And I said, I want to live here because it's near where my grandfather and father had places. And he sold me the house that I'm living in now, 35 years ago. And so I've been here for 35 years. And when I moved down here from New York, I wanted a building to store my carriages in so they wouldn't be full of moths and mice and in barns with sheets over the top like they'd been in New York. So I said, I'm going to build an air-conditioned room. And then everybody, all you folks wanted to come over and see the carriages, so I was always getting up from my desk, going and showing people. An employee said, why don't you start a museum and pay for that, and then it'll help to cover your expenses for storing the carriages. And so that mushroomed into 1 gallery to 2 galleries to 3 galleries, and now there are 4 galleries here and 165 carriages later. But I was very blessed this last weekend to recreate the special event we had here with the Armbruster dress chariot. It's the only full dress chariot, in other words, gala golden carriage that the aristocrats would have used in Europe. It's the only one in the United States, and it's the only one in private ownership in the world.
And that's the black and gold one directly out.
Yes,
out here.
directly outside. So look at that on the way out. We had a wonderful weekend with the Carriage Association of America just this last weekend. And we actually put horses to it, and we had the staff in full state livery, not full livery, because that's a lesser livery that I would use on the coaches, the ones, but full state livery.
You can't put together a museum like this without a large group of volunteers.
Oh, let me tell you. And our youngest is 75, I think. Well, I think you're actually paid now. Some of them are in the room. They are fabulous people. And let me tell you, they have gone, some of them had knowledge of horses. Some of them had a little knowledge of carriages. But they know more than I do now, because they've got a clientele here that tells them stories, right? Well, here they are. There are 2 of them, Arlene and Sue, are sitting right here. Stand up. You guys need to be right.
Will anybody who's a docent please stand up here?
The reason they know more is because they are older than I am. And they listen to all the stories of all the people who come into the museum and tell them, my grandfather had something like this, my something had this. Oh, I remember the days when I used to ride in a sleigh. And they'll tell you these fantastic stories that you can't come by unless you're in here meeting the wonderful people that go through this museum. And they're just, and the surprising thing that everybody says about the people who created these carriages or lived at a time when these carriages were used, those people were really smart. And yeah, they were. They knew how to engineer a wheel, they knew how to drive a horse, they knew how to do woodworking and upholstery working, and all of this wonderful ironworks, all these wonderful disciplines that go into a carriage.
I have 2 more stories I want to ask you about. Would you tell us what the, I want to say the right name, Equine Heritage Institute is? We see some banners here. Tell us a little bit what that does.
Yeah, it's a not-for-profit institution. If anybody wants to open their pocketbooks today, see Jeff. I'm trying to write books. What I did is I developed a whole lot of PowerPoints for training docents and speaking to the public here when I was very active in the ownership of this organization. And so I'm now turning those all into books, but we're doing it through the not-for-profit because we qualify as a 501c3 corporation for donations. So if you want to help us cover Jeff's salary, because he's the technician that does most of the publishing, we're self-published through this organization, okay? It's the Equine Heritage Institute. We're online. There's several websites. There's the equineheritageinstitute.com or .org. Excuse me if I get this right. The Equine Heritage Museum, which has got some historical references and videos and streaming pictures in it. And then there's the GloriaAustin.com, which has more of the carriage collection in it. So, I mean, it's... But you can help us to publish all these great books. Oh, by the way, publish great books. They're available. They're available in the gift shop. There's 7 out now, I think, and there's a really nice one that's really cheap. This is under $10 in most places. It might be a little bit more here. But all this is just like a picture book of the places I've driven around the world. Everything in France and Belgium and Netherlands, in the United States, in Canada, in Great Britain. Here's the picture of the long walk in Great Britain and some of the things. And our books are a little bit different. in that our books, because of the modern way we learn things today on the internet, but it's pictures and then very little words. So at least half of the page has to be in pictures. So this is the modern way to publish. That's why all those publishing companies are going out of business, because they forgot about pictures. But Time Life and some other ones are doing picture magazines now, and they're selling.
Well, I'm going to get in trouble if we don't say this.
Oh.
I'm going to give the actual... Founded in 1995, the mission of the Equine Heritage Institute is to educate, celebrate, and preserve the history of the horse and its role in shaping world civilizations and changing lives. Now here's the thing. We could spend 4 hours with Gloria, seriously, talking about the history of the horse and its effect on the world as well as on American culture. We don't have 4 more hours, so we won't get to that.
Okay.
But one day corner her and ask her about that, because she's very knowledgeable, and we'll talk to you about that. You have a very interesting story that it became obvious that Grand Oaks, is here, because it's more than just a carriage museum. There's a very impressive facility here. It was taking up a lot of your time that you would rather put toward the Institute, toward putting these books together,
right.
Sharing the history of the horse, the effect of the horse, doing your traditional carriage driving, and spreading that world, incidentally bringing many more women into that particular organization. So tell us how you transitioned out of Grand Oaks to the Institute, because it's a slightly humorous story. Okay. Just wait.
My first husband has a woman friend that he worked very close with for a long time. And he wanted her to have a job. So he actually bought, and I say that, I mean, there's more elements to that than just this. But anyway, and she is here, and she's working here at the Grand Oaks. But it gave me an opportunity to retire. And so I wasn't the least bit unhappy, because I could now afford to travel a little bit more, and I could afford even myself. I give contributions to this not-for-profit so that we can spread the word about the horse and the carriage. So is that the funny story?
I just thought it was funny that your ex-husband bought your business. I
know.
That's pretty good.
Right,
and you
right.
still live really close by.
That's right,
That's
yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are getting close to the end of our time. I think you've done a fantastic job so far. I've done an amazing job keeping us on track. How it's not 5:30, I don't know, because you like to tell a story. She has so many more. This last part of the thing about our Living Legends series that we have found is I never interview somebody who's sitting in a retirement home. We don't do it, because we're looking for people who are still active in their community or in their passion. I truly believe that somebody that you can call a living legend, first of all, will tell me that they're not really a living legend. Every one of them says, oh, I'm just doing what I would have done anyway. I'm not doing any of that to get a title. They also tend to be people who are still very active and don't really care how old they are. That's why I always ask you to tell me your birthday at the beginning. Because you have to be able to admit how old you are. You have to be able to
figure it out. That's right.
How old you are. And
so what am I going to do when I grow up? Is that the question?
What I always do at the end is sort of, I want to acknowledge the fact that this is not a funeral.
Thank you.
Number one.
Thank you.
Okay. And I want to talk to you about sort of what's next. So what is Gloria Austin doing next?
Let me tell you, this was the most perplexing question asked when we sat down a couple weeks ago. I don't know. I keep my eyes open. I mean, I know I'm going to continue to write these books and produce these books. But life is not your plan, necessarily. You have to get prepared. And if there's a glimmer of something that comes by, you grab hold of it, okay? So watch for the sparkle and the glimmer that passes by you and grab it. That's all I can say. So I don't know.
A good interviewer would say we would end on applause, but I actually can't. Sorry, I have one last question.
Okay.
I always ask this of everyone. This is also an introspective question, but if this wasn't the hardest, that's great. If you were writing the history of your life so far, what would you say is your greatest or proudest accomplishment?
Oh my goodness gracious sakes. What do you think? Well, maybe creating this place. She's see, what's my...
Space for the women in the horse.
Oh, yeah, maybe it's just being, I'll tell you what the greatest accomplishment is being a mentor and a role model for other people. So if I can inspire Joni Coons or even men, there's some representatives here today from a very wealthy man from up in the Chicago area who he wants to do more with horses and carriages as he's getting older. And so I met with his consultants and his coachman today, and just to inspire other people. So my greatest accomplishment is probably being a teacher, a role model, and an inspiration to other people. So don't give up, stay on a roll.
If Gloria Austin has inspired you in your life, or at least inspired you today, will you please join me in thanking our living legend of Lake County, Miss Gloria Austin.